The early morning light filtered through the narrow alleyways of the bustling city, casting elongated shadows on the damp ground. Oliver stirred awake, the remnants of the storm that had battered the streets the night before still visible in the puddles that collected in the crevices of the pavement. He blinked against the brightness, the air thick with the scent of wet asphalt and the lingering bitterness of rain. His makeshift bed, a collection of tattered newspapers and a worn-out blanket, offered little comfort, but it was home, however temporary. As he sat up, Oliver rubbed the sleep from his eyes and took in his surroundings. The alley was littered with debris, empty cans, discarded wrappers, and remnants of last night's meals. It mirrored the chaos of his life, unpredictable and often harsh. Yet amidst the clutter, there was a flicker of hope in Oliver's heart. He had dreams that danced just beyond his reach, visions of a life where he didn't have to scavenge for scraps or hide from the world. "Maybe today will be different," he whispered to himself, a ritualistic affirmation he had grown accustomed to. He had learned that hope was a powerful ally. It kept the darkness at bay, if only for a little while. Standing up, he brushed off his clothes, which were a patchwork of hand-me-downs and found items, each piece telling a story of survival. There was a small mirror tucked away in his pocket, a shard of glass he had salvaged from a broken frame. He used it to check his reflection each morning, a ritual that reminded him of his humanity. Today, however, he found it hard to look at himself. The boy in the mirror looked weary, his brown eyes reflecting a life too heavy for his young shoulders. As he stepped out of the alley and into the bustling street, the cacophony of city life enveloped him. Horns honked, people chattered, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery. Oliver's stomach growled in response, a reminder that his scavenging would soon need to begin. He made his way to a nearby park, a makeshift gathering place for those like him, where the benches served as tables and the trees offered shade from the sun. While wandering through the park, he caught snippets of conversations around him. Most were mundane, filled with the chatter of daily routines, but one caught his attention. Two men, dressed in crisp suits, stood by a fountain, their voices low but urgent. "Have you heard about Harold?" one of them said, glancing around as if he were afraid someone might overhear. "Yeah, the reclusive millionaire? I hear he's been giving some money to charities lately," replied the other, his tone laced with skepticism. "But nobody really knows him. He keeps to himself, always holed up in that mansion of his." Oliver's ears perked up at the mention of Harold. He had heard whispers of the millionaire before, tales of his kindness mixed with legends of his solitude. The stories painted Harold as a complex figure, one who had known tragedy and had retreated from the world, yet still cared enough to help those in need. "Some say he's got a heart of gold," the first man continued, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. "But there's something about him. You can't help but wonder what he's hiding." Oliver felt a strange connection to the man they spoke of. Much like himself, Harold seemed to be a figure trapped between two worlds, the one he was born into and the one he had chosen to inhabit. The thought resonated with Oliver, a reflection of his own existence. He had never met Harold, but the millionaire's life intrigued him. Could he be someone who understood the struggles of surviving against all odds? As the men walked away, their conversation fading into the background, Oliver's mind whirled with possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to connect with Harold. What if he could share his own story, his hardships and dreams? The thought ignited a spark within him, fueling his determination. Determined to find food, Oliver began to search through the usual spots, rummaging through garbage bins and asking for leftovers at nearby cafes. While his stomach growled louder, he kept his eyes peeled for anything unusual. That's when he noticed a dumpster that seemed to have something out of the ordinary sticking out of it. Curiosity piqued, he approached cautiously. Peering inside the dumpster, he saw it, a tattered briefcase, its leather worn and cracked, yet still intact. His heart raced. Perhaps it held something valuable, something that could change his fortune. He glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, and reached in to pull it out. The briefcase felt heavy in his hands, promising untold secrets and possibilities. With great care, Oliver unlatched the worn clasps, his heart pounding in anticipation. Inside, he discovered a collection of documents, yellowed with age but meticulously organized. As he sifted through the papers, his eyes widened at the sight of property deeds, each one revealing ownership of multiple valuable properties scattered across the city. It was as if he had stumbled upon a treasure map, each address leading to a potential fortune. "Wow," he breathed, astonished by what lay before him. The thought of these properties stirred dreams in his mind: homes, schools, a future free from fear and hunger. Maybe this belongs to that Harold, he thought, a sudden realization dawning on him. This could be his chance to reach out to the reclusive millionaire. With renewed purpose, Oliver tucked the documents back into the briefcase and set off, a plan forming in his mind. As he walked, the weight of the briefcase felt both burdensome and exhilarating. He was about to venture into a world that had always seemed out of reach. The city around him buzzed with life, but for Oliver, it felt like he was on the precipice of something monumental. The streets he had navigated so many times now felt different, charged with possibility. In that moment, Oliver understood that this was more than just a set of documents. It was a chance to change his destiny. The boy who had been invisible in the eyes of the world was ready to step forward, to knock on the door of a life he had only dreamt of. With every step, he felt the pulse of hope quicken within him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, the future held something bright. Oliver stood at the threshold of a new world, the bustling streets of the city behind him fading into a distant memory. With each step he took toward Harold's mansion, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The towering buildings around him whispered tales of wealth and privilege, their reflective glass surfaces glimmering under the sun, casting a dazzling light that almost blinded him. He had never seen such opulence outside the pages of a storybook: golden doorknobs, manicured hedges, and the faint scent of blooming roses wafting through the air. As he wandered through the affluent neighborhood, Oliver couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. He watched as elegantly dressed women strolled by, their high heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement, while men in tailored suits carried briefcases that undoubtedly held the weight of power and influence. What would it be like, he pondered, to live a life where each day didn't revolve around survival? The thought seemed surreal, almost like a fantasy. But today was different. Today, he was a boy with a purpose. He recalled the documents he had found in the briefcase, a treasure map indeed. They weren't just papers, they were a lifeline. Oliver had spent the night going over them, tracing the lines and names with his fingers as if they could grant him the key to a better life. Harold was a man of wealth, but also, as he had heard, a man who possessed kindness, an unusual combination in Oliver's experience. After what felt like an eternity of walking, he finally reached the mansion. It loomed before him, a grand estate with tall columns, sprawling lawns, and an intricate wrought-iron gate that seemed to guard not just the property, but also the secrets held within. Oliver paused, hidden behind a tree, his heart racing as he took in the sight. The mansion was everything he imagined and more, but the thought of approaching Harold filled him with hesitation. "What if he doesn't care?" Oliver muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he just laughs at me, or worse, calls the police?" But deep down, he knew he had to try. This was the only chance he had to change his fate. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, feeling the weight of his decision settle on his small shoulders. He walked along the gravel path leading to the grand entrance, his heart pounding louder with every step. As he approached the door, he hesitated, his hand hovering above the ornate brass knocker. "What am I doing? I'm just a scruffy kid from the streets," he thought, the doubt creeping in like a shadow. But the memory of his life, the cold nights spent huddled in alleyways, the gnawing hunger that never quite left him, fueled his resolve. He couldn't allow fear to dictate his future. With a sudden burst of courage, he knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the stillness, and for a moment, everything stood still. He held his breath, waiting, the anticipation crackling in the air around him. The door creaked open, revealing Harold, a man whose presence seemed to fill the doorway. He was tall, with greying hair and deep-set eyes that spoke of wisdom and sorrow. Oliver stood frozen, taking in the sight of the man who was both a stranger and the embodiment of his hopes. Harold looked down, his brow furrowing in confusion at the sight of the young boy standing before him. "Can I help you?" Harold asked, his voice deep and resonant, yet laced with a hint of curiosity. Oliver's throat felt dry, and he stammered, I found something. Documents. They belong to you." His voice trembled, but he pressed on, lifting the bundle of papers he had carefully folded in his pocket. "I think they're important." Harold's expression shifted from confusion to intrigue as he took a step back, motioning for Oliver to enter. "Come in then. Let's talk." As Oliver stepped over the threshold, he felt a rush of warmth envelop him. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking, adorned with exquisite art pieces and plush furniture that seemed to beckon him to sit. Harold led him to a sitting room where sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the space with an inviting glow. "Sit," Harold instructed, gesturing to a velvet armchair that looked far too luxurious for someone like him. Oliver hesitated, then obliged, feeling the softness beneath him, a stark contrast to the cold concrete he was used to. "Now, show me what you found," Harold said, leaning forward with an intensity that made Oliver's heart race. With trembling hands, Oliver unfolded the documents, revealing the detailed lists of properties owned by Harold. "I found these in a dumpster," he explained, his voice steadier now. "I thought you might want them back." Harold's eyes widened as he scanned the papers, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "These... How did you come across them?" "I was scavenging for food," Oliver replied, a tinge of shame in his voice. "I didn't think much of it at first, but when I saw your name, I knew they had to belong to someone important." For a moment, silence enveloped the room, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. Harold looked at the boy, studying him closely, as if trying to decipher the complexities hidden behind Oliver's scruffy exterior. "You're quite brave, you know," he finally said, his tone softening. "Most people wouldn't dare to approach someone like me." "I just wanted to help," Oliver said, his eyes locking onto Harold's. "I thought maybe you could use these, and maybe I could ask for help too." "Help?" Harold echoed, his brow furrowing again. "What kind of help are you looking for?" Oliver took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his circumstances press down on him. "I want a home. A place where I don't have to worry about where my next meal is coming from. I want to go to school. To learn." Harold's gaze softened further, and for the first time, Oliver saw a flicker of emotion cross the millionaire's face, something akin to sadness mingled with understanding. "You've been living on the streets?" Oliver nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've had to. It's not easy." Harold's heart ached at the innocence of the boy before him, so different from the golden-haired children he often saw playing in the park. "I can't even begin to imagine what that must be like," he murmured, almost to himself. "And yet, here you are, asking for help." The two sat in silence, the enormity of their respective lives hanging heavily in the air. Harold found himself moved by Oliver's honesty, a stark contrast to the facades he encountered daily in his world of wealth. Here was a boy stripped of pretense, bearing his soul in a way that was both refreshing and heartbreaking. "I'll help you," Harold said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "But first, let's make sure these documents are returned to their rightful place." Oliver's heart soared at Harold's words, the flicker of hope igniting within him. "Really? You mean it?" "Yes," Harold replied with a warm smile, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a sincerity that made Oliver feel safe. "Let's start with a proper meal, shall we?" The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "You mean I can eat here?" "Of course. You've earned it." Harold rose from his chair, moving toward the door with a newfound purpose. "Come along, Oliver. It's time to show you what a real meal looks like." As they walked toward the kitchen, Oliver couldn't help but feel that this moment could mark the beginning of something extraordinary, a chance not just for survival, but for a future he had never dared to dream of. Oliver stood in the grand foyer of Harold's mansion, the weight of the tattered documents heavy in his small hands. The marble floors gleamed under the soft golden light of the ornate chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with paintings that seemed to whisper stories of grandeur and opulence. Yet, all Oliver could focus on was the man standing before him, his expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Why would you bring me this?" Harold asked, his deep voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the entrance hall. He scrutinized Oliver, taking in the boy's disheveled hair and worn clothing, remnants of a life spent navigating the harsh streets. The briefcase documents felt like a treasure map in Oliver's mind, but he sensed Harold's reservation. "I found it in a dumpster," Oliver replied, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "It had your name on it. I thought maybe you could use it." As he spoke, Oliver stepped closer, holding out the documents. Harold's eyes widened as he reached for them. The moment their fingers brushed, a jolt of energy surged between them, and Oliver felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. He watched intently as Harold skimmed through the papers, confusion knitting his brow. "What is this?" he murmured, more to himself than to Oliver. "These are property deeds." "They're yours," Oliver insisted, his eyes brightening. "You own all of these places. You could do something good with them. Help people like me." Harold paused, lifting his gaze to meet Oliver's earnest brown eyes. There was something in the boy's gaze, a mixture of desperation and determination that stirred something deep within him. "And why do you care what I do with my properties?" Harold challenged gently, his intrigue evident. "Because," Oliver hesitated, searching for the right words, "because I don't want to live on the streets forever. I want a home, a place to call my own. Everyone deserves that." For a moment, the air between them thickened with unspoken understanding. Harold's heart ached at the raw honesty in Oliver's voice. He had amassed wealth and isolation, yet here was a boy who had nothing but dreams. "You think I can help you?" Harold asked, his voice softer now. "I think you can help a lot of people," Oliver replied, his confidence growing. "You could turn these places into shelters, schools, places where kids like me can feel safe." Harold's mind raced. The idea was absurd, but tantalizing. He had spent years cloistered in his mansion, shunning the world outside, yet this boy, a stranger, was presenting him with an opportunity to reconnect, to make a difference. "You really believe that?" Harold asked, almost incredulously. "Yeah," Oliver said, his face lighting up. "If you really cared about helping people, this could be your chance." As they stood there, a strange bond began to form, bridging the gap between their worlds. Harold couldn't help but admire the boy's tenacity. "Tell me about yourself, Oliver," he urged, his curiosity piqued. "What's your story?" Oliver glanced down, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I've been on my own for a while now. My mom, she's not around anymore. I used to live in a small apartment, but we lost it when she got sick. I've been scavenging ever since. It's hard, but I keep hoping things will get better." "What do you want?" Harold pressed, his voice gentle. "If you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" "I just want a home," Oliver replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere I can sleep without being scared, and I want to go to school. I want to learn. I want to be someone." The vulnerability in Oliver's admission struck Harold like a wave, crashing through the walls he had built around himself. "You want to be someone," he repeated softly, the weight of the words hanging in the air. "I want to be important," Oliver clarified, his eyes bright with passion. "Not just to myself, but to others. I want to help kids like me." Tears pricked at the corners of Harold's eyes, and he quickly blinked them away, embarrassed by the sudden swell of emotion. "You're already important, Oliver," he said, his voice thick. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." The boy's gaze met Harold's, and in that moment, something shifted. Harold felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that had long been buried under layers of grief and regret. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've lost so much," Harold confessed, his voice trembling slightly. "I've pushed everyone away. I thought isolating myself would help me cope, but it only made things worse." Oliver tilted his head, studying Harold's face. "What happened?" he asked gently, sensing the weight of the man's past. Harold hesitated, the memories flooding back, images of laughter and love, followed by chaos and loss. "I had a family once, a wife and a daughter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were everything to me. But one night, it all changed. I lost them, and I didn't know how to deal with the pain. So, I shut myself away." "I'm sorry," Oliver said quietly, his heart aching for the man before him. "That's really sad." Harold chuckled softly, the sound tinged with bitterness. "Sad doesn't begin to cover it. I thought I could bury my grief under wealth and solitude, but it never worked. I just ended up feeling more alone." "Maybe you don't have to be alone anymore," Oliver suggested, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "You could help me, and I could help you. We could be a team." The idea hung in the air between them, pulsating with potential. Harold felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. "A team, huh?" he mused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What would that look like?" "Let's start with your properties," Oliver replied enthusiastically. "You could open them up to kids who need a place to stay. You could even teach me about business, and I could help you manage things." As Oliver spoke, Harold's heart swelled with a mix of admiration and gratitude. This boy who had endured so much was offering him a glimpse of redemption. "And what do you get out of this?" Harold asked, his voice gentle but probing. "I get a chance," Oliver said simply. "A chance to change my life and maybe help others do the same. And I get to know you, someone who could teach me what it means to be strong." Harold felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of hope. "You really believe in me, don't you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course," Oliver replied, his eyes sparkling with determination. "You're not just a millionaire. You're someone who can make a difference." As they stood there, the weight of their shared burdens began to lift. They were two lost souls, each carrying their own scars, finding solace in the possibility of change. Harold felt the walls around his heart begin to crack, and for the first time in years, he dared to dream of a life filled with purpose and connection. "Then let's do this," Harold said, his voice steady. "Let's find a way to make a difference together." Oliver beamed, his heart racing with excitement. At that moment, the world outside felt a little less daunting, and the future shimmered with possibilities. Together, they would navigate the uncharted waters of their lives, forging a bond that neither of them had anticipated but both desperately needed. The sun peeked through the heavy curtains of Harold's mansion, casting soft beams of light across the ornate furnishings. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of buttery croissants, creating an inviting atmosphere. Harold stood by the counter, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the young boy who had unexpectedly turned his life upside down. Oliver. The name echoed in his mind, stirring a mix of emotions he hadn't felt in years: hope, warmth, and an unfamiliar sense of purpose. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, Harold glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for Oliver to arrive. After their initial conversation, Harold had promised to help him. The weight of that promise felt heavy on his shoulders, but he knew it was a chance to break free from his self-imposed isolation. Moments later, a timid knock at the door broke the silence of the mansion. Harold's heart quickened as he approached the door, the anticipation of seeing Oliver filling him with both excitement and trepidation. He opened the door to find the boy standing there, his wide eyes sparkling with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "Good morning, Oliver," Harold greeted, unable to suppress a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harold," Oliver replied, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He was still dressed in the same worn clothes he had worn the day before, but there was a brightness in his demeanor that Harold found encouraging. Come in. I have something special planned for us today," Harold said, stepping aside to let Oliver enter. As they moved into the kitchen, Oliver's eyes darted around, taking in the luxurious surroundings. He marveled at the polished marble countertops and the gleaming appliances, a stark contrast to the alleyways he had called home. "This place is huge," he exclaimed, voice tinged with awe. Harold chuckled softly. "It certainly is, but it can feel quite empty at times." The honesty in his voice caught Oliver off guard, and he looked up, meeting Harold's gaze. "Why do you live here all alone?" Oliver asked, the question hanging in the air between them. "It's a long story," Harold replied, his voice suddenly heavy with unspoken memories. "But today is about you. I want to show you something." With that, he led Oliver to a small art studio attached to the mansion. The room was bright, filled with canvases, brushes, and vibrant splashes of paint. "This is where I used to create," Harold explained. "I haven't painted in years, but I thought you might like to try." Oliver's eyes widened as he took in the sight. "You paint?" "I used to," Harold said, his tone wistful. "I was quite passionate about it, but life has a way of taking us down different paths." Before Oliver could respond, Harold handed him a brush and a blank canvas. "Why don't you give it a shot? Express yourself." Tentatively, Oliver dipped the brush into a pot of bright blue paint and began to stroke it across the canvas. With each movement, he felt a sense of liberation. The colors danced beneath his touch, forming shapes and patterns that spoke to him in ways words could not. Harold watched, a smile creeping onto his face as he saw the boy lose himself in the art. "This is amazing," Oliver said, glancing up at Harold. "I love it." Harold nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. "You have a natural talent, Oliver. I think you should pursue this. Art can be a powerful outlet." As they continued to paint and laugh, Harold felt a sense of connection with Oliver growing stronger. The boys' laughter echoed through the studio, filling the once lonely space with joy. For the first time in years, Harold allowed himself to forget the burdens of his past, instead focusing on the present moment. Later that day, as they cleaned up the studio, Oliver couldn't contain his excitement. "Can I come back tomorrow? I want to paint more." "Of course, you can come whenever you'd like," Harold replied, his heart swelling with a newfound purpose. "But I also want you to start school next week." "School?" Oliver echoed, his face a mix of disbelief and hope. "You mean it? I've never been to school before." Harold nodded, his expression serious yet encouraging. "Yes, you deserve an education, Oliver. It's important for your future. I'll help you enroll and get everything you need." Oliver's eyes lit up with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. "Thank you, Mr. Harold. I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me," Harold said softly. "Just promise me you'll try your best." As Oliver left the mansion that day, he felt a sense of hope igniting within him. For the first time, he envisioned a future that included more than just survival. He could see himself in school, making friends, and exploring his passion for art. However, as the days passed and Oliver settled into his new routine, whispers of Harold's past began to creep into the corners of the mansion. The media buzzed with stories about the reclusive millionaire, painting him as a man haunted by tragedy. A tragic accident had taken his family years ago, leaving him alone in a world that seemed too bright and too empty at once. In the evenings, while Oliver was busy with his homework and art projects, Harold would often sit in the dim light of his study, staring at old photographs. The smiling faces of his wife and daughter haunted him, their absence a constant reminder of the void in his life. News reports would occasionally surface, recounting the details of the accident, a car crash that had stolen everything he held dear. As he read through the articles, Harold felt the familiar pang of guilt wash over him, mingling with the happiness he found in Oliver's presence. It was a conflicting feeling, one he didn't know how to navigate. He wanted to protect Oliver from the darkness that surrounded his own past, but he also felt a sense of urgency to confront it. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Oliver noticed Harold staring out the window, lost in thought. "Mr. Harold, are you okay?" he asked, concern etching his features. Harold turned to the boy, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, Oliver. Just thinking about things." "Like what?" Oliver pressed, his curiosity piqued. "Just life, I suppose," Harold replied, his voice distant. "Sometimes it's hard to let go of the past." Oliver furrowed his brow, sensing the weight of Harold's words. "But you're helping me. You're giving me a chance. That's important, right?" Harold nodded, but the sadness in his eyes didn't fade. "Yes, it is, and I'm glad to be here for you. But we all have our struggles, Oliver. It's important to remember that." Their conversation hung in the air, both aware of the unspoken truths lying beneath the surface. Oliver wanted to help Harold, just as he felt Harold was helping him. As the night deepened, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet somehow connected by the shared experience of overcoming their pasts. Little did they know, the shadows of Harold's past were not done with them yet. Whispers of the tragic accident that had shaped Harold's life were beginning to surface, threatening to unravel the fragile bond they had formed. But for now, in the warmth of the mansion, they found solace in each other's company, unaware of the storm that loomed ahead. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the bustling city as Oliver and Harold stood in the spacious living room of the mansion, surrounded by elegant decor and framed memories of a life once vibrant. The charity event they had organized was just days away, and the air was thick with anticipation. Oliver, now dressed in a crisp shirt and jeans, looked remarkably different from the scruffy boy who had first knocked on Harold's door. There was a spark in his eyes, a mix of excitement and nervous energy, as he prepared to share his story with a crowd that might change the lives of many. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Harold asked, his voice a blend of concern and encouragement. He stood beside Oliver, his hands clasped together as he studied the boy's expression. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, was now alive with purpose thanks to Oliver's infectious spirit. "I have to be," Oliver replied, his voice steady despite the flutter in his stomach. "If I can help just one kid, it'll be worth it." Harold nodded, a wave of admiration washing over him. Oliver had become a source of inspiration, not just for himself, but for Harold as well. The boy's resilience and determination to uplift others had reignited a spark in Harold's own heart, long dulled by years of isolation and grief. "Remember, just speak from your heart," Harold advised, placing a reassuring hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You have a story that needs to be told. It's powerful." That night, as the event unfolded, the grand ballroom of the mansion transformed into a sea of faces, each eager to contribute to a cause that resonated deeply. Ornate chandeliers hung overhead, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests who mingled, sipping wine and exchanging pleasantries. Harold had invited influential figures from the city, philanthropists and local business owners, all willing to lend a helping hand. As the clock struck 7, Oliver stood backstage, heart racing. The moment had come. He could hear the muffled chatter of the crowd, the clinking of glasses, and the faint sounds of a string quartet playing softly in the background. This was it, the moment he had envisioned countless times, a chance to share his journey. "Oliver, it's time," Harold said, his voice cutting through the boy's anxious thoughts. Oliver took a deep breath, nodding as he stepped forward, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. When his eyes adjusted, he saw the room full of curious, expectant faces. "Good evening, everyone," Oliver began, his voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. "My name is Oliver, and I'm here to share my story with you." The audience fell silent, their attention focused entirely on the young boy standing at the podium. Oliver glanced at Harold, who stood at the edge of the stage, his expression a mix of pride and concern. With determination, Oliver continued. "I grew up on the streets," he said, his voice clearer now, resonating through the room. "Every day was a challenge, and there were times when I didn't know where my next meal would come from. But I never lost hope. I dreamed of a better life, of having a place to call home, and the chance to learn." As he spoke, Oliver's words painted a vivid picture of his struggles, nights spent shivering in alleyways, days filled with scavenging for food, and the constant fear of being alone. But he also shared the moments of kindness from strangers, the small glimmers of hope that fueled his determination. "I met someone who changed my life," he continued, glancing towards Harold. "Mr. Harold is not just a millionaire. He is a man with a big heart. He saw me, a kid with nothing, and decided to help me. Together, we're working to make a difference for other children like me." The room stirred with a mix of emotions. Some guests were visibly moved, while others exchanged glances, perhaps questioning the sincerity of a boy from the streets sharing such a tale. But Oliver pressed on, his passion igniting. "I'm standing here today because I believe in hope," he declared, his voice rising. "I believe that no child should have to live without a home or an education. We can all be the change. We can give these kids a chance." As he finished speaking, a wave of applause erupted, and Oliver felt a rush of exhilaration. He had done it. He had shared his truth. But as he stepped down from the podium, exhilaration quickly turned to trepidation. Would his story resonate? Would they really care? Taking a deep breath, he joined Harold at the side of the stage, who enveloped him in a warm embrace. "You were incredible," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. "You spoke from your heart, and that's what matters." "Thanks, Mr. Harold," Oliver replied, a shy smile creeping onto his face. "I hope they understood." As the evening progressed, the atmosphere shifted. People began to mingle, discussing the impact of Oliver's words, and donations started pouring in. Harold moved through the crowd, engaging with guests, making connections, and emphasizing the importance of their cause. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the atmosphere abruptly changed. The doors of the ballroom swung open, and a woman stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was striking, with long dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to pierce through the crowd. A hush fell over the room as she walked forward, her expression serious. "Harold!" she called out, her voice cutting through the lingering applause. "We need to talk." Oliver's heart sank. He had never seen this woman before, but the tension in the air was palpable. Harold's face paled as he stepped away from the group he had been speaking with, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "Martha," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The audience, now captivated by the unexpected turn of events, watched as the two exchanged glances filled with unspoken history. Oliver stood frozen, a mix of confusion and concern washing over him. "What are you doing here?" Harold asked, his tone sharp, revealing a hint of unease. "I had to come," Martha replied, her voice steady but strained. "You can't just hide from the past forever. It's time we faced it." The tension thickened, and Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. Who was this woman, and what secrets from Harold's past were about to unravel? The warmth of the evening, the hope they had built, seemed to hang by a thread as the crowd watched in rapt attention, oblivious to the storm brewing between the two. The atmosphere in the grand hall of Harold's mansion shifted dramatically as the unexpected guest took center stage. The woman, elegantly dressed yet carrying an aura of sadness, scanned the crowd before her eyes locked onto Harold. A hush descended over the audience, the air thick with anticipation. "Harold," she began, her voice steady yet laced with emotion, "it's time the truth came to light." The weight of her words hung heavily in the room, and Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. He stood slightly behind Harold, his heart racing, confusion swirling in his young mind. "Who are you?" Harold's voice was firm, but Oliver could sense the tremor beneath it. "What do you want?" The woman took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she stepped forward. "My name is Clara. I was a close friend of your family. Before the accident." Harold's expression hardened. "I don't want to hear any more of this. That part of my life is over." "Is it?" Clara pressed, her voice rising with urgency. "You've buried the truth along with your family, but it's time to confront it. The world deserves to know what really happened that night." Oliver's heart raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of Harold's past he had glimpsed. He had always sensed a deep-seated sorrow within the millionaire, but this revelation felt like a punch to the gut. Clara continued, her voice trembling. "Your family was not just a victim of a tragic accident, Harold. There were circumstances, decisions made that night that changed everything. You need to share the truth with Oliver, to let him understand who you really are." The room felt suffocating as Harold's gaze fell to the floor, the weight of Clara's words crippling him. "It was a mistake," he murmured, almost to himself. "I should have been there." Oliver's heart ached as he watched the man he had grown to admire crumble before him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Your family was driving home from a charity event, Clara explained, her voice softening. They were happy, full of life, but there was a storm, and a decision was made to take a shortcut. They didn't have to, but they did. Harold's face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't know. I wasn't there. Stop, Clara interrupted, her voice rising again. You need to stop blaming yourself. It wasn't your fault. But you've let that guilt consume you, and it's time to let it go. You have a chance to make a difference now, to honor their memory. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Oliver felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within him, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming desire to comfort Harold. The man who had offered him a lifeline was now facing his darkest demons, and Oliver didn't know how to help. Is this why you've shut everyone out? Oliver asked, taking a tentative step forward. Because you think you didn't do enough? Harold looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. I thought by isolating myself I could protect others from the pain of losing me too, he admitted, his voice cracking. But in doing so, I lost everything. Oliver's heart broke for Harold. He could see the layers of loneliness and regret etched on the man's face. But you don't have to be alone anymore, he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. You have me. You can still live for them. Clara nodded, her expression softening as she took a step back, allowing the two to connect. He's right, Harold. You're not defined by your past. You have the power to change lives, to create a future that honors your family's legacy. Tears streamed down Harold's cheeks, and he buried his face in his hands, the dam of emotions finally breaking. I don't know how to forgive myself, he sobbed. Every day feels like a betrayal to their memory. Oliver, feeling a surge of courage, stepped closer and placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. What do you want, Harold? What do you really want for yourself? Harold looked up, his gaze piercing into Oliver's eyes. I want redemption, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to make a difference, to help others like you. But I don't know if I'm worthy. Worthy, Oliver echoed, shaking his head. You've already done so much. You helped me when I had nothing. You showed me that there's hope. That means you're worthy. Harold's breath hitched as he absorbed Oliver's words. The boy's unwavering faith in him ignited a flicker of hope in his heart. I want to live again, he finally admitted, his voice trembling. I want to be a part of the world, to connect with people, to embrace life, not hide from it. With newfound determination, Oliver proposed, Then let's do it together. We can start a foundation in their name, help other kids like me, give them the opportunities we didn't have. You can change lives, Harold. We can change lives. Harold's eyes widened in disbelief. You would want to do that with me? After everything? Of course, Oliver replied, his voice steady. If we can face our pasts, we can build something beautiful for the future. We'll honor your family together. The room fell silent as Harold stared at Oliver, the boy's sincerity washing over him like a warm embrace. In that moment, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble, and the possibility of a new beginning flickered before him. Thank you, Oliver, Harold whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means to me. Clara, witnessing the poignant moment, felt her own heart swell with hope. This is just the beginning, she said softly. You have a chance to heal, Harold. Don't let fear hold you back any longer. With a newfound sense of purpose, Harold nodded, wiping his tears away. Let's do it, he said, his voice steady now. Let's create something that will make a difference. Oliver smiled, his heart swelling with excitement. Together, we can change the world. As they stood united in that grand hall, amidst the remnants of past pain and the promise of a brighter future, Oliver and Harold felt a bond stronger than ever. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but they now had each other, two souls intertwined through circumstance and hope, ready to face whatever lay ahead.